Welcome to Shameless Leadership. I'm your host, Sarah Dean. This show is for women leaders who are committed to advancing both their own leadership and the leadership of those around them. In each episode, I offer practical strategies and inspiring stories to help you become a more confident, compassionate, and curious leader. The truth is, you were born to lead. So let's start now, together. Hello, Shameless Leaders. I'm thrilled to be here with you today, even though we're talking about something pretty challenging, but also very necessary. The topic we're going to be talking about today is around toxic leadership and how to rise even when your boss is holding you back or holding you down. And the reason we're talking about this is because I've been in too many calls, coaching call situations, or conversations with people at events where I've heard women talk about the way that their bosses are holding them back, the way that their male bosses specifically are holding them back, creating toxic work environments, creating leadership dynamics that are not just frustrating, but also inappropriate, also harmful, also abusive. And when I'm in these conversations, I feel this immediate mama bear instinct, this immediate need to protect the person who I'm talking to, whether it's a coaching client or whether it's someone I just met after coming off stage in an event. And I don't always have the opportunity, in a coaching call, I can sit and we can talk things through and give strategies, but I don't always have the opportunity to dig deep in that moment if it's outside of that coaching call context. And so I thought there needs to be an episode where I can be like, hey, let me point you to episode 946 of Shameless Leadership, because this is a topic that I think is touching more lives than we know. And what I'm recognizing the more I'm out and about is that this is something that many women feel extremely isolated in, feeling like they have a boss who is undermining them, who's manipulating them, who's maybe gaslighting them, who's being inappropriate, harmful, potentially abusive in maybe a myriad of ways. And the thing that's been really unifying as I've talked to women about this over the last 6 months or so is that every woman I've talked to has started the conversation out with some sort of acknowledgement around maybe it's just me, I'm not really sure. And there's this lack of self-trust and clear sense of self-doubt when women start talking about this. And this is the other piece of it where I thought we need to get this out in the open, because the things that I'm hearing about are definitely not at the fault of the women who I am talking to and in conversation with. And so this is not at all going to be, a rant about like all men are horrible leaders or anything like that. This really is for more extreme behavior that people are experiencing in those gender power dynamics in the workplace. But while this, I believe and hope that it's somewhat seldom and extreme examples, I think it's way more frequent and rampant than we think. It's not everywhere. It's not all the leaders. It's not in all the places, but it's in more places than we probably know. And what I know is that when women are looking for support to feel seen, heard, held, valued, validated, that being able to find resources is a way of finding power. And also being able to feel not alone is a way of starting to heal. And so in thinking all that through, this episode became really, really important to me. So what I want to talk about today and how I want to frame this, I want to talk through 7 different steps that you can take if you are in a position where you feel like you're trying to rise in your profession, in your leadership, in your workplace, your work environment, and you feel like you're being held back by someone and by a boss, and in a way where you have lost your voice in some way. You've lost your sense of agency. You've lost your ability to maybe have some power, maybe have control. You maybe feel like you're being gaslit. You maybe have a sense that you're being manipulated. And you probably have this sense of, is it just me? Am I reading this the wrong way? I don't know. You probably have some uncertainty around it, because when people who have power are manipulating other people and gaslighting other people, it's very intentional. It's not always conscious, but it's very intentional to make the person that they're gaslighting or manipulating feel full of doubt and to feel like maybe it's just me, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Like that's part of the plan. That's part of the strategy of
the person who's trying to be dominant, who's trying to have control, who's trying to demonstrate power over someone else. So it's a red flag. If you're thinking that, if you're like, is it just me? I'm not really sure. No, if you're thinking, is it just me? It's most likely it's them. So we'll get into that in just a minute. So I'm going to give you 7 different things that you can do if you feel like you're in this situation. So if you feel like you're in a situation where you cannot rise because someone is holding you back, your boss is holding you back or holding you down, the first thing that you can do is to separate your worth from their opinion or value or treatment of you. One thing that can be really confusing is that when we have someone who's telling us that we're doing something wrong or that we're not like rising to the occasion, or they're being manipulative, they're gaslighting in a certain way, they're being critical, they're tearing at our character, maybe at our performance, we can start to equate their words with our value. And this can be extremely damaging. And sometimes this happens slowly over time. So we don't recognize it until a certain point where we no longer have a sense of self-worth, where we feel unworthy, where we feel unqualified or maybe incapable, where we feel like we are a shell of our former self. So the first thing you can do is separate your worth from their treatment of you and from their opinion of you and from the way that they have devalued you, because their poor behavior and the harm that they're instilling, that's a reflection of them. That's a reflection of their leadership style and their leadership brand. And that's not a reflection of you. So making sure that you can find that line, which might take some support from other people to kind of help you figure out how to navigate like what exactly is happening, but being able to recognize like, oh, wait, they're saying, that I'm bad at this, or I never get it right, or whatever the harmful messaging is. And for you to be able to disconnect and dissociate from that in an appropriate way, to be like, hold on, no, just because they said it doesn't make it true. And then know where you can get that outside validation. Know who your people are who can be like, hold on, no, like that's wrong. That's inaccurate. The truth is you're really great at what you do, or here's where your strengths are. And not to say that like you don't have anything to work on. This isn't about like, being overly positive and not being able to take any constructive criticism, but it's about being able to take constructive criticism from people who've earned the right to give it to you, because they are able to give it in a way that is healthy and productive, not in a way that is harmful and just an abuse of power. So that's the first thing, is separating your worth from whatever, from this person's opinion and treatment of you. The second thing to do is to trust your instincts. So trusting your instincts goes back to what I was just saying a minute ago. When women come to me and talk about this, and I've had this happen so many times with coaching clients, especially, they'll spend a decent amount of time telling me, this could just be me. And then they'll start to share different experiences. And a lot of it is them trying to navigate this cognitive dissonance around, here's what happened, but here's maybe where I got it wrong, or here's maybe where I got confused, or here's maybe where I could have done something different. Now, taking accountability for doing things wrong or having room to grow, like, yes, of course we want to be doing that. That's definitely part of learning and growing and being a good leader and developing in our profession. But when you're doing that because someone is consistently pushing you down, when someone's making you feel less than, when someone's making you feel inadequate, that's very different. So if you're thinking to yourself, is it just me? Or, maybe I'm just not meant to do this. Maybe I just am not good at this. Maybe I'm just not that valuable. Maybe I'm not good at my job. Maybe I don't deserve to, go any higher in this role or in this organization. When you start to have that self-doubt that is creeping in and staying with you, in spite of the fact that you are working hard and that you are doing good work and that other people are recognizing that you're doing good work and other people are acknowledging you for it. And it's just this one person, your boss, who's saying like that you're not. That is a sign that this is about them, that their power over you is about them, and their need to create self-doubt in you is on purpose. Again, it could be subconscious, it could be conscious, but it's about them. It's not about you. So really learning to trust your instincts, to get connected to that own sense of self, to recognize like, wait, hold on. I might not be perfect, but I'm not doing a horrible job. I deserve to be, spoken to respectfully. I deserve to be given criticism in a way that is healthy and productive and supportive, not just bashing me as a person or as the person in this role. So trusting your instincts when you start to feel like, I don't think this is the right dynamic. This doesn't feel like a good power dynamic. It feels like something is off, to really trust that. women are conditioned not to trust their intuition over the course of our lives in many, many different ways. So this becomes really tricky. It's very challenging to do this. So if you have this instinct of like, oh, I don't know if it's me or not, it's probably not you. The next thing I want you to do is to be strategic about your visibility. So when you're in a situation where you have a boss who's trying to hold you back, hold you down, they're gaslighting you, they're being manipulative, they don't want you to have visibility. They don't want you having power, they perceive as a threat to their power. So what they want to do is try to control, manipulate, make you feel powerless so that you don't go after opportunities for visibility. So what I'm going to invite you to do is to strategically plan your opportunities to be visible. So this means finding visibility opportunities outside of being recognized by your boss, outside of that boss giving you opportunities themselves, and instead figuring out what are the other ways that I can create visibility? What are the other ways that I can show who I am as a leader? And this, we'll talk about building your leadership brand in just a minute, but this really is an opportunity for you to be demonstrative of your personal leadership brand. So this might be through the way that you communicate with your team, with the way you communicate with your teammates, with the way that you communicate in cross-functional meetings, so that there's leaders in other areas able to see like, oh, wow, look what you're contributing, look what you're doing. So really giving yourself permission to shine in other areas where other leaders get to see you shine is going to be really, really significant. You can also be offering to do work for, to lead initiatives, be engaged in other places where you have that opportunity to show your skills and to show other leaders what you have in you, so that you are not just dependent on this one boss who is not capable or competent in terms of being able to give that to you. Building those strategic relationships is also, and being able to find those places to be visible in other ways is also going to be really significant when it comes to finding ways that you can connect and build relationships with people who will open doors for you. Because if you have this boss who is intentionally being manipulative and controlling and trying to take away your power, you will need other people to open doors for you. And so building those strategic relationships, and I'm working with someone right now that I'm thinking of who has this boss who just has been real comfortable and happy keeping her down for a long time and kind of baiting her along, dangling some carrots, but then like never actually giving her anything that he promises. And this has been going on for years. And over the course of our time working together, over the course of the last handful of months, she has decided to build some relationships outside of her relationship with her boss and work on some projects for other leaders in her organization. And it's been so amazing how these other leaders are like, oh my gosh, like what else can we do for you? Like, we want to open doors for you. And she had this recognition that she didn't realize how much she was being held back until other people were like coming out of the woodwork to open doors for her. And this was because she started to take some chances and opportunities to be more visible in spaces beyond where her boss has control and power. And it's been amazing to see what has happened and how people are just like lining up with, what do you need? How can we help you get there? And so incredibly empowering as well. So building those strategic relationships with people who want to open doors for you, and then surrounding yourself with those people who can be advocates and mentors and potentially sponsors, being able to build cross-functional allies, being able to connect with past leaders or even peers, being able to build a network around yourself that's like a coalition and an army, so that you're not this island of one who feels like you have no power and that you have no hope or direction or anyone or anywhere to go, where it feels like there's potential and possibility for you. The fourth thing, is to build your brand beyond your current role and your relationship with your boss. So when I work with clients on this, one of the things we're always really being intentional about is not just how do you navigate this circumstance, but how do you want the way that you navigate this circumstance to shape you as a person who then is a different kind of a leader moving forward, or a different kind of a team member moving forward. So thinking through, what are the values that you want to uphold in spite of how someone else is trying to hold you back? When you are clear on some of those values, then you get to start living them and finding ways to integrate them in your daily work, in your daily life. And that starts to shape your leadership brand. We've probably all had bosses where we feel like they just kept you small. I know that I have. And so thinking through, when someone's just keeping me small, what are the ways that I can take up space? And what are the ways that I can model what it looks like to use my voice? And what are the ways that I can model integrity? And what are the ways that I can, stand up for myself and demonstrate self-advocacy? What are the ways that I can champion a cause and show that I stand for something? So thinking through, what are the values you want to uphold in this situation? What is the leadership brand that you want to be building? And then where are the places that you can do that outside of this relationship? So this might look like, finding opportunities to speak and present and contribute to the organization in other ways, as we've talked about. I'm thinking of a client right now who was not given a lot of opportunities, just made to feel small repeatedly in her role over the course of a handful of years. And she was invited to do some writing for another organization and kind of as a subject matter expert. And it opened up all these different options for her, like writing options and speaking and being on panels and being able to be a subject matter expert in all these different capacities. And it was something that she hadn't really considered. She hadn't considered that her work bubble could get bigger than the bubble that she had been existing in. And as it got bigger, more and more opportunities started to present themselves, where she got to build her brand as a leader in a totally different way that existed completely outside of the relationship with her boss, who was really trying to keep her small. So thinking through, how can you be consistently working on that in order to, how can you be consistently working on building that leadership brand so that the people who are seeing you in action are going to open doors for you, but are also going to see what you're capable of and then provide opportunities for you. Also thinking through, how can you be the leader who models the opposite of what's being modeled to you, which can be really challenging. And also, let's be honest, it can be a little burdensome. So if you're in a situation where you're like, I don't have the energy, like I'm so drained by this dynamic, I don't have it in me to go be this bold, shining model of leadership. It doesn't need to be a right now thing, but thinking through, when you have the capacity, and if you have it now, do it now. But how can you be that leader who really embodies the opposite of what you're being modeled right now? And I say this to my clients a lot, that I would never wish a horrible boss on someone. I would never wish a horrible, unhealthy, especially harmful relationship on someone. And when we're in those situations, and most of us are at some point, there are some really valuable lessons that we learn in terms of, if the roles were reversed, what would I do differently? And that's where we start to see, like, I would model compassion, or I would model boundaries, or I would model, power with versus power over. I would model integrity. I would model respect. I would model curiosity or kindness. So thinking through, what are the things that you wish that your boss could be doing for you, and then become the boss that does those things, can be really, really helpful. And that's part of building that brand as well. The fifth thing that I want you to do is set boundaries routinely and without apology. And so boundaries can look like a lot of different things. And sometimes when we think of setting boundaries in a personal or in an interpersonal relationship, we think we have to like go in and make some big declaration, like, no, I'm not going to do that because I'm setting a boundary. And you might be in a situation where that's would not work at all and could potentially be really harmful. So I'm not saying that that's how we're going to set boundaries. So instead, if you can do that, you want to do that, go ahead and do it. But if that's not safe, if that could jeopardize your role or jeopardize this, make this relationship significantly worse, modeling boundaries and practicing setting boundaries also looks like documenting conversations. It looks like keeping track of what's happening. It looks like telling other people what's happening so that there is a record of what's going on. Noting where there's gaslighting and manipulation happening, noticing where there's coercion or where there's intentional confusion being used as a weapon, noticing where shame is used as a weapon, noticing where there's anything where, if your kid came to you and said, hey, my teacher at school is doing this to me, you'd be like, hold on, what? Like, noticing those things. If you don't have kids, think about your niece, your nephew, like someone, a beloved child coming to you and be like, hey, my teacher's saying these things to me at school or doing these things. You'd be like, excuse me, what? Like, we're going to the principal right now. If your boss is doing those kinds of things, then you need to be doing some documentation. So trying to keep things as documented as possible. If this is happening in face-to-face, off-the-record conversations, then trying to keep as much as you can on the record and in documented conversations. So keeping things in email, keeping things in Slack, wherever you have the capacity to be tracking conversation and having that paper trail. naming really specific behavior patterns in ways that are safe for you in that moment. And so I want to be careful with this because sometimes going to HR isn't the safe thing. And I can say in full transparency, my husband went to HR about a situation and lost his job over it. So you can't always take things to HR. You need to know your dynamics in your HR department. You need to, there can be a lot of layers and there can be a lot of manipulation that happens behind the scenes. And so my husband's situation is certainly not representative of everyone's, but he took something to HR and just a few days later was laid off. And the things that he'd taken to HR were absolutely weaponized against him, even though he'd been encouraged to go and encouraged to share things in a certain way. So being careful about how you share what you share, being careful about your documentation, and knowing what keywords you need to be using to be taken seriously. If we had been more thoughtful, if my husband had been more intentional and strategic about that, I think things would have happened differently. We didn't think that through because we thought like HR is that's the safe people, right? They're not always. So being careful with that and always having more than one person in the room when you take an issue to a trusted source. The other thing is to make sure that you don't put yourself in one-on-one situations where you don't feel emotionally safe, or safe in other, physically or emotionally safe, mentally safe. So that might mean if this is a boss where you have to have one-on-ones, this might mean that you don't have one-on-ones anymore, that instead you request two-on-ones or one-on-twos or whichever, but where you're like, no, I need a second party in the room if we're going to have a conversation. That's an appropriate boundary. And that doesn't need to be like an apologetic, like, hey, I'm really sorry, I just feel a little uncomfortable. That can be like, I'm unwilling to have this conversation. And that can be like a very simple, concise, if you need to speak with me one-on-one, there needs to be a third party present. The sixth thing that you can do is to pay attention to how you're authoring your own story. And this part is really important. So as I mentioned a minute ago, when you are in the situation, again, wouldn't wish this on anyone, wouldn't wish that bad, toxic boss situation dynamic on anyone. But when you're in that situation, you are the author of your story. And when you feel powerless, someone else has more power. And when they perceive that they have more power and then they perceive that you feel powerless, that can really fuel them and light a fire under them. What I want you to be able to feel is the fire under you in terms of being able to own and honor where you have power and how you're going to maintain that power. So even when you're in the middle of something messy, that you get to decide how you're writing the story and you get to decide really specifically how the story ends. So part of this is understanding what are the motivations of the person who is causing this harm. So what are your boss's motivations? What are their insecurities? A lot of times this behavior comes from insecurity. When we look at toxic behavior, especially toxic behavior from males, I would say toxic behavior from anyone, but when we look at toxic behavior from males, it often is rooted in insecurities from men who don't know how to talk about what they need, what they want, how they feel. They don't know how to have appropriate interpersonal communication to get what they want. So they use power to leverage what they want, leverage getting what they want instead. So recognizing these insecurities, recognizing how, when, where someone might be threatened by you, and then don't appease them, but instead figure out how you can work around them, how you can work through them, how you can essentially beat them at their own game, because you know that at the end of the day, you are going to come out of the situation able to own the ending of the story. So even if you have to stay in the situation for a while, that you are writing, that you're the author of the story, you're writing the story, and that you get to own it. And you get to own it by sharing the story however you want down the road. I mean, truthfully, of course, but like sharing your actual legitimate experience. You get to own it by deciding what you want to do with the power that you do have, whether you stay in the situation or leave. You get to own it by deciding how you engage, how you show up, how you set boundaries. So there's all these different ways where you actually do have some power. And as soon as you can recognize these ways, and we've talked about a handful of them already, but as soon as you can recognize them, that's when you are starting to take, like, you're taking back, literally like taking back the pen to paper to be like, hold on, no, 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 no. Like, he is no longer writing this. I am now writing this. I am writing this story. And that can give you fuel, can give you hope, can give you belief that there's a way through this. And it will also give you the opportunity to leverage this story moving forward. So when I think about this in my own experiences, when I've had experiences where someone has treated me poorly and via a power dynamic, and especially a gender related power dynamic, I've been very clear with myself and sometimes with the other person that if they've chosen to treat me a certain way, that I have a platform and I have a voice and I'm visible in all sorts of different ways. And I will absolutely leverage the heck out of that situation moving forward. So there's actually one boss in particular that I share a story about in a number of keynotes. And it always brings me a little bit of joy because he was horrible. He treated everyone horribly, but I think there were some unique moments that I had with him where I was like, wow, I think I'm like getting like the extra horrible treatment. And at the time, I was in my mid 20s at the time. And at the time, it just felt awful. Like it was, coming home from work crying and couldn't figure out how to get out of it. And, really awful. But I started to figure out how I could get out of the situation and how I could okay, like how can I save up my money and like quit this job and get the next thing lined up? And I started to figure it all out. And then when I started speaking, I was like, you know what the best revenge is? Making a lot of money telling the story about this guy over and over and over again. And so whenever I get on stage and I'm like, I'm getting paid to give the talk right now and I'm going to out this dude again, brings me so much joy. And I don't out him by like first or last name or like where people are going to go Google him or anything. I do use his actual first name, but it's a very common name. But anyway, I think that we have the power to decide how am I going to use this moving forward. So as you're thinking about building your leadership brand, when you're authoring your own story, you get to decide, what do I do with the story moving forward? How does this story become a part of my journey and a part of my brand where I get to share it with others in a way that I own my power in it and that this person no longer has any power over me? And that feels incredible. And it can take some time to figure out that dynamic and to figure out how you're going to do that. But challenge yourself to do that because that's the process of reclamation that can be really transformative in these moments. So number 6 is about authoring your own story. Number 7 is how do you strategize either a strategic stay or an exit plan? So as you're authoring your own story, being thoughtful and mindful about, do I need to stay here for a while? So in the example I was just giving about this one particular boss, I was in a situation where I couldn't just up and leave when there was a sequence of a handful of things that happened in pretty quick succession, but I couldn't just up and leave. I couldn't afford to do that. And so I gave myself a timeline and I was like, okay, 6 months, like look at the calendar, 6 months from now, what's my action plan for being out of here? And I totally made it happen. I got all my ducks in a row and I knew okay, I have to stay for these 6 months. And then during these 6 months, what are the things I need to do to leverage the heck out of this, what's left here, so that I do have the stability and security as I navigate a transition? And it worked out perfectly. And even though it felt so messy at the time, but I was able to use that 6 months to really be intentional, thoughtful, strategic, and mindful about what is the next thing I want to do and how can I take everything I've learned in this situation to create a better situation for myself. And that's what I ended up doing. And in that situation, I was able to really essentially bring a book of business with me because I had built so much trust with the people who I surrounded myself with at that time that I didn't need to rely on this boss to build my business or to make money or to be secure and financially stable. I was able to build trusting relationships in this really unhealthy boss environment and boss relationship. I was able to build trusting relationships with all of my clients at that time. And when I left, they were like, wherever you're going, we're going with you, Sarah. Like, we don't have any use for this organization where you're at or this former boss of yours. Like, we are with you, not for the organization, not for this guy, for your boss. Wherever you're going, we're following you. So I was super strategic during that time. So how can you think through how you can create that strategic stay, whether you need to stay for a few months, maybe you need to stay for a few years because you need to keep your kid on benefits or your partner on benefits. Or, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons that sometimes we have to stay in rough situations. So thinking through, when's the right time to make a move? Where do you need to be brave? Where are you telling yourself a story in terms of maybe you're giving yourself permission to stay for too long and you really do need to give yourself a kick in the butt and get out? And then recognizing that that's all part of that story. That's all part of writing the ending. And thinking through, how can you leverage these other steps in terms of building other relationships, disconnecting your worth from what's happening to you, trusting your instincts, creating other visibility opportunities, building that leadership brand in a visible way so that other people see and they're willing to open doors for you, setting those boundaries so that you can get through the time that you still have to put in. And then knowing that this whole time you're writing your own story and that you get to carry that story with you, writing that ending exactly the way that you want to write it to give you the most power moving forward. So strategizing that strategic stay or that exit plan is going to be that next step. And recognizing that in that moment of deciding, like, here's my strategic stay and this is the plan for that, or here's my exit plan and here's the plan for that, that you've now moved into this new phase of the story. And this is a phase where you have the power and that you have the decision-making and action-taking authority, and that gives you something that can't be taken. So I hope this was helpful. I hope as you are thinking through these dynamics that might be really challenging for you, that you can see how to start making your circle a little bit bigger. When we're in these kinds of situations, often our circle gets really small because we're carrying doubt and we're carrying shame and we're carrying worry and we're carrying, like oftentimes confusion. And when we're in that space, things tend to get smaller and smaller and smaller. I want you to expand your circle. Part of getting through this is making your world bigger again, because when people are trying to control and manipulate you and weaponize different things against you, they want your circle to get smaller. So if you make your circle bigger, if you make your world bigger instead of smaller, you will counter their objective, you will counter their power in a way that at a certain tipping point, they don't have the power anymore. So thinking through, how can you make your circle bigger? How can you make your world bigger so that even when your leadership and your power is unseen or dismissed or undermined by this boss, that you are still leading, that you are still showing up with authority, that you are still showing up as the fullest version of yourself, that you recognize that your job is not to shrink in the shadows of someone else, and especially someone else's smallness and insecurities, but instead your job is to stand really tall in your truth, to use your voice, to be visible, to shine, to be the person who's building your leadership brand, to be the actual leader of your life rather than letting someone else lead for you. I hope this was helpful. Share this episode out with others who you know or who are struggling with this kind of boss relationship and dynamic. And please know that I'm in this with you always. I always have your back. And if there's anything I can do for you, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you for allowing me to spend time in your ear today. If you liked this episode, be sure to subscribe to this channel. To learn more about my speaking, training, and coaching services, visit saradean.com. That's SARADEAN. I would also love for you to connect with me on LinkedIn at saradean.com/LinkedIn or on Instagram at saradeanspeaks. I love hearing from my listeners. Thank you for showing up for yourself today. I see you, I hear you, and I'm holding space for you today and every single day.